The NBA is back again. Let's try to predict which players might be in store for breakouts and price bumps this season. Hey everyone, welcome back to another Data Dive powered by Market Movers. My name is Tyler Nethercott, better known as TPott. This week, back into basketball. The John Tesh NBA theme song has been playing in my mind for the last few days in anticipation of the opening tip-off between the Sixers and the Celtics. And what I want to do today is to take a look at some of the players who broke out in different capacities last season, specifically the ones whose prices increased last year. And I'll do that, of course, with the brand new Market Movers X. We reimagined the entire look and feel of Market Movers to bring you a better, easier to use, and more visually compelling experience with plans starting as low as $9.99 per month. Visit marketmoversapp.com and use promo code DIVE to try it free for 7 days. And now, let's jump into our Market Pulse feature. All right, so right now I'm gonna start with our Market Pulse feature, and what I've done here is I've pulled up 4 indexes. The first is our SCI 500, which is our very general 500 iconic cards index that we use to track the market as a whole at a very holistic level. And the other 3 indexes that I've got are basketball-specific indexes. These are ones that our data team has made, which comprise of different iconic cards, key rookie cards, key LeBron and Steph cards, different things from these eras from 2018 to 2020, 2010 to 2017, and 2000 to 2009. And what I've done here is I looked last year at the first 6 weeks of the NBA season. Obviously, right now, if you're looking to, flip something, make a quick move on something that's going to get hot, I wanted to look at how these different indexes performed relative to the SCI 500. And last year, not so great. The basketball indexes as a whole, in 6 weeks, for example, the 2018 to 2020 index was down almost 25%, 24.5%. The other two down 14.8% respectively, each of them. So they were pretty much getting crushed in the first 6 weeks. Compare that to the SCI 500, which was down 5%. We know we've been seeing a gradual tick down and correction of most sports cards at a holistic level, but these were performing much, much worse. So that was in the first 6 weeks. What about the entire season? If I switch over and I look, this is October 19th of last year through the last game of the regular season, May 21st of this last year, of earlier this year. Similar story, actually. Similar story, even worse performance. Those basketball indexes continued to be, frankly, a bloodbath, down 49% on that 2018 to 2020 basketball index. And the SCI 500 was down, let's say, just 12.4%. The other two obviously did not perform much better. So what did I do here? I went into these different indexes and I looked for cards and for players that performed well in terms of their price changes, and I kind of did a spot check. And so that's what I'm going to walk you through here. I'm going to show you at first a few different groups. And this first one, this is the group of guys who actually went up in that first 6-week period. And I want to see what jumps out to you right away when you look at this list, okay? Deni Avdija, Talen Horton-Tucker, KZ Okpala, Miles Bridges, and Cody Martin. These are guys who saw price increases in the first 6 weeks. So what stands out to you there? What stands out to me there is that none of them held that kind of price increase for the rest of the season. Miles Bridges, prior to knowing about the recent issues that he has had, which are despicable, he had a fantastic year last year. He really broke out. He had a great performance. He had a good season. The rest of these guys were a flash in the pan. I honestly don't even remember these guys being hot. I know everybody was talking about Talen Horton-Tucker. I don't really remember Deni Avdija doing much of anything, nor with these other guys. That's how short-term their little hype period must have been. So they were up in those first 6 weeks. So what does this tell me about this coming season? If you're sitting on some of these guys who you maybe ripped, if you opened some Prism or Optic or any rookie product from last few years, maybe wait and watch closely to see which players come out of the chute with some hype around them. And if they have that happen, move them. Just move them and move on, because this is obviously a good indicator that the stickiness of some of these performances might not be the strongest. So that's the case of what happened last year. And this is really, I don't want to say it's the only players, but these are the guys that when I looked through that list, they were the ones who stood out. And the rest of them were much, much lower thresholds like you see here. all the way down to the bottom, 32% for Cody Martin in that 6-week period. Anybody else I think was 20% or less, which isn't, at the end of the day with fees and things, that great of a margin. So let's jump over and let's take a look at another group here, okay? What I'm looking at here, I'm calling this the newbies. These are the guys maybe from 2018 until now, the rookies who broke out last year. This is the entire season. So you'll see the date range here, October 19 to May 21st. And a pro tip here, you can use these little quick bubbles to change to different time frames, but you can also manually select your date range to get this exact window to see how different cards and players performed. Sometimes people don't realize that when they're using this screen. And again, this data goes back as far back as when we added these cards, 90 days prior to when we first added these cards. So many of these go back, over a year, 2 years, 3 years. So the first player here, Jalen Brunson, man, this guy's cards and his prices, what a story last year. He completely broke out. I'm gonna be categorizing some of these players into different categories. And Jalen Brunson, he was kind of what I'm calling the underdog story, but also quickly moving into what we might say is an emerging star category. And I'm gonna have those two things as different categories as we walk through this. But he really came out of both of those. He was a later draft pick. Obviously, he wasn't the focal guy for Villanova in college when he was there. And he really broke out. He was a big part of the success for the Mavericks last year, and he obviously got his big payday to go to the Knicks. He also had a great preseason so far, so maybe he's the real deal. A lot of people weren't too sold and weren't too happy as Knicks fans that they paid that guy instead of getting another big name. Anthony Simmons, honestly, I keep forgetting how you actually say his last name. All I know is I hear people say it both ways, so you can beat me up in the comments about that. But he, surprisingly, man, there was so much hype around this guy starting back in like 2019. He's out there just taking shots like crazy. He really played well when they got rid of CJ McCollum last year, and he's a guy who kind of broke out and saw his prices increase. Darius Garland, he had more price growth during the first part of the season last year, but steady increase, up 16.2%. I'm putting him kind of into that emerging star category. He's obviously, he kind of reminds me, and I've done comparisons in the past, to an early and young Chris Paul. Very, very smart passer, high assist totals, low turnovers, solid shooter. Obviously a long way to go to become Chris Paul, the next Chris Paul, but early career stats, a lot of similarities to CP3. And then the guy I wanted to highlight on here who did not go up is John Morant. John Morant had a fantastic season last year. He had an absolute coming out party. I'm putting that into the category of a superstar is born. There are people right now saying that they think John Morant going into this season is the best player in the NBA. I'm not sure I'd go to that extreme, but he is certainly a franchise caliber player. He was down by the end of the season, 24.5% on his Prism Silver, and a lot of his cards were down. Some of them were up. You know that famous Luminance one. That one was up, certain others, but his Prism Silver, the kind of flagship one that we use to gauge the market, down 24.5%. So even though he had this big coming out party, and he's a superstar, his prices were so pre-baked with so much expectation that they ended up going down. And that's something that I like to warn about a lot on this channel. So let me jump over and take a look at another group. And these are basically the guys who are a little more seasoned than the 2018 and onward group. We can call these guys the veterans. Andrew Wiggins, 84.6% growth. He finally did it. He finally had an awesome season. He couldn't flourish in Minnesota for whatever reason. He moves over to Golden State, and I'll tell you the thing that really impressed me last year about Wiggins, which I'm not sure the everyday, casual NBA fan noticed, was his defense. He was actually a good defender in college at Kansas, and then he came into the league, and he really didn't seem to be putting any emphasis into defense. He played defense last year, especially in the playoffs, and he was a pretty solid player. Some people said he should have been the MVP in the finals. We all know that was going to be Steph's award to win. And then scrolling down, there was obviously this big love affair with the breakout of DeMar DeRozan last year. He and Zach LaVine playing extremely well for the Bulls, who unfortunately for Bulls fans, they kind of fell apart in the second half of the season. Another guy here with a new scene, DeJounte Murray. He kind of came into his own last year. He was an all-star. He had great stats. He's moved over to Atlanta. A lot of debate about whether or not he and Trae Young will be able to play well together. I think they will. I actually think they really will. I think it's going to be a great combination. And then scrolling down, I want to show you a couple cards specifically. Steph Curry, Early in the year, his prices were going crazy. He breaks the three-point record. He wins an NBA championship again. He wins NBA Finals MVP. And his prices, 0%. Now, bear in mind, this was to the end of the regular season. 0% on this Panini card, down 44.7% on his flagship Topps card, the one that everybody knows. This is his PSA 9, a little more population to track. And the other guy is Joel Embiid, who was down 18.2% on his Prism Silver. He was the MVP runner-up last year. There were people saying he should have won the MVP, and he was down 18.2% by the end of the season. So really, really interesting to look at these different players. And I'm going to kind of point out here, for example, with this Steph Curry card, this is the yellow line that we're looking at. That's his Panini card. Look at how high this got up. At one point, it was up, to $2,300, up 184% from the start of the season, and it came all the way back down to neutral. So what does this say? I always say, take the money. It might go higher, it might go lower. Set your own personal benchmark about when you want to sell. Use price alerts in Market Movers to set a price alert so that if you buy a card for $200, hey, when this hits $350, when this hits $400, I'm gonna get an alert that's gonna notify me on my email, on my phone, and tell me it's time to get it listed on eBay or wherever else and sell it. That's what I would be doing with some of these cards. Okay, so now I wanna shift into this upcoming season and looking forward and maybe trying to make some predictions or at least to highlight some different guys who could fall into different buckets. And the first bucket that I mentioned is this sort of superstar is born bucket. These are guys who have had the expectation, who are finally breaking out, who are finally living up to that big, I'm talking like top lottery draft pick expectation. And the first guy here on the list, I've pulled up, this is specifically price movements for these guys, price movements by players, so we're aggregating all of their data together, and I'm looking over the last 6 months, essentially since the last season ended until now. The first guy is Zion Williamson. He's the guy that everybody's been talking about. His sales volume on his cards is up significantly in recent weeks. People are starting to get hype behind this guy. Up just 4% since the end of last season, but in a time when the rest of the market has been going down, to see a guy up isn't a bad sign. Man, the injury concerns. He was up more than this, and now all of a sudden, more issues. I don't know if it was his knee or his foot. I forget what they said, but there was another issue recently that caused him to sit out in the preseason. Next up, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Now, the big caveat here is he's on the Thunder. I don't think they're going to be competing anytime soon. They've got all these draft picks and all these pieces, but Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a guy who has been sort of flying under the radar. He's averaging like 24, 6 and 6, kind of D Wade type stats, even though their game is somewhat different. Can he break out? If he gets up to 28, 29, 7 and 7, you start talking about like Luka territory in terms of his numbers, Trey territory. People might start to pay attention to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander a little bit. Anthony Edwards, LaMelo Ball, Jalen Green, Cade Cunningham. Okay, guys, these are not rocket science picks. I get it, but these are the ones that I'm saying. If you're looking at the players who you might think are going to break out this season, here's the list into that superstar category. Do you think there's anybody else? Did I miss anybody? Put them down in the comments below and let me know. Maybe you throw Donovan Mitchell onto here finally, having moved to Cleveland. Maybe he's going to break out. I could have included him in this list. But look at the price drops on some of these guys. Ant-Man, he had a great end of the season last year, still down 11.8%. LaMelo down 24, and 50 and 54% down on Jalen Green and Cade Cunningham. A lot of that, I will tell you, has to do with that early release cycle on products, and then the prices come down, and we see it time and time again. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with these guys. Jalen Green was lighting it up in the preseason. He had a great end of the year last year. Cade Cunningham had a great end of the year last year. Let's see what they can do in this coming season. So that's the first category. Superstar is born. Which of these guys, if you had to pick one from this list, or somebody who's not on here, who you think is going to emerge as a superstar this year, who are you picking? Okay, next group, the candidates for emerging stars. So maybe not superstar status, maybe not the top tier in the NBA top 10 status of players, but guys who could be all-stars, guys who could really emerge and make a name for themselves, become household names. I'm pulling up this list. These are not necessarily my picks. There's a lot of buzz around these players in terms of fantasy basketball, in terms of what I'm hearing at card shows and on Instagram. DeAndre Hunter, oh man, he's shown flashes. If he can score consistently, he's actually a pretty good defender. Who knows? Obviously, I've expected big things from him in the past, and he's just disappointed me so far. Emmanuel Quickly is a guy that a lot of people were high on last year. I'm talking about a lot of people. He didn't quite live up to it, unlike 2 down Tyrese Maxey, who did have a really strong season last year. Similar guys, Kentucky guys. Sandwiched in between, you've got Tyrese Halliburton, the guy who I was so devastated my Pistons did not take when they went for Killian Hayes instead. So you've got Halliburton, Maxey, Chris Duarte, Franz Wagner, and Josh Giddey. These are all names that I'm hearing around people saying, I really think they can break out. They're going high in fantasy basketball drafts because people are expecting really big things. What do you think? What do you think of these guys? Man, same thing you're seeing with Giddey, like Cade and others. Prices way down because there was a lot of hype and expectation. He's the guy that kind of like creeps in and out of that top 5 conversation from that draft class where you've kind of got him coming in and out. People mostly talking about Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green, Mobley, Scotty Barnes, but Josh Giddey was sort of the one floating in and out of that conversation at times last year. I don't know. I'm not sure. If I had to pick one of these guys, if I'm saying a single one that I think could break out the most, I'm probably going Tyrese Maxey this coming year. Franz Wagner showed a lot of promise, but he's on the Magic. I'm not really sure if the Magic are going to get attention unless they actually start winning in an absolutely loaded Eastern Conference. So that's the emerging stars group. Let me know which of these players, again, do you think has the most potential to break out into that emerging star category this coming season? All right, shorter list next. Next group, I've got 2 more. This one and another one. This is what I'm calling like the fulfilling the hype category, the hype fulfilled group. 4 guys here. Guys who had a lot of hype around them. I mentioned a few of them before. First one up is Michael Porter Jr. When I first joined the Sports Card Investor Discord, there was not a single player who was talked about more than Michael Porter Jr. It was like everybody, even at a time, I think Michael Porter Jr. was getting talked about and debated more than Zion Williamson, more than John Morant, more than Luka Doncic, more than Trae Young. It was MPJ. People kept talking about him over and over again, saying if he can get healthy, get his back right, he's going to be unstoppable, unguardable. He's shown flashes. Hopefully he can play this well and play well for the Nuggets, who are kind of rebuilding. Again, they've still got Jokic, obviously, but they're kind of rebuilding their core. MPJ needs to be a big part of that if they're going to have success. Lonnie Walker IV. Can Lonnie Walker break out with added minutes this year? He had consistency issues last year. He would have a good game, and then he would have a poor game and a good game. Not uncommon for young players. Similar to him, Anthony Simons. Both of these guys not down a ton. These are all like really pretty much flat in the last 180 days. So it's interesting. Are people kind of holding their breath and hoping to see them break out? Not as much of a loss of confidence. And then Patrick Williams here down 10%. He obviously had the injury last year. The Bulls are pretty deep roster. They've got a lot of talent. So it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of minutes he gets and what his role is with the team. But there's a lot of people who are very high on Patrick Williams. What do you think of these 4 guys? And is there anyone else who you would kind of put into that hype category who's just had a lot of excitement and hasn't quite yet done what they're supposed to do in terms of expectation? Let me know. Again, in the last group that I want to jump over to, this is a little bit bigger group and a little bit kind of a more subjective one. We're throwing some things out and seeing what sticks. But again, I use a lot of like fantasy predictions, season predictions, Vegas odds, different things to kind of look at this list. And I don't necessarily agree with all of these, but this is the group of like the underdog story. And it could be underdog for a few reasons. They were just a late draft pick, somebody that's never really been on anybody's radar, or maybe they've had injury problems and they've sort of been cast into the outer darkness and they're trying to make a comeback. So I'm going to go through this list quickly. Josh Okogie, we've got John Wall obviously making the big move out west. Can he resurrect his career and actually contribute? DeAnthony Melton on the Sixers. That guy's sneaky good, like sneaky, 2-way, really talented. I don't know how much attention he can get for that type of play. If the Sixers are really good and they make a run and he's a big part of it, I do think I heard that he might be starting. Maybe I misremembered that. But Melton's an interesting guy that's getting a lot of fantasy attention. Jaden McDaniels, he showed flashes last year with the Timberwolves. This is a guy who he's kind of defensive. He can shoot the 3. He does a little bit of everything. We'll see what his role is going to be with the Timberwolves. PJ Washington Jr., with the Miles Bridges situation, a lot of people are saying, okay, who's going to fill that role? He showed some flashes his rookie year, and then last year he kind of took a step back. Markelle Fultz, that would be the ultimate kind of comeback underdog story. If he can really come back, stay healthy. Man, he moves quickly. He was passing the ball well. He was kind of getting his shot back. He's a guy that I'm frankly just rooting for because I feel like he had so much potential and has been through so much. I'd love to see him be a success story. And then Colin Sexton, Colin Sexton's a guy who a couple of years ago, he torched the Nets with the Cavs. And I don't remember how many points he scored, like 50 or something. And everybody went crazy and is like, Colin Sexton's the next guy. And then all of a sudden it was like, no, we don't want him anymore. The Cavs don't want him anymore. He doesn't fit with our team chemistry and our balance. He was injured and they seemed better off. I will tell you, I know he was a big defensive liability, like one of the worst defenders in the NBA, but he can score, and people like to pay attention to scoring. Can he break out? Last two guys on this list, Javon Carter. I don't expect big things from Javon Carter. He's on the Bucks now, but again, people are sort of having him as like a sleeper candidate in fantasy basketball. And Zaire Williams, who showed some really big upside last year, kind of lost in the shuffle, but he might be a guy who could break out as well. So putting a bow on all this and coming back, here's what I did. I put all these guys in, and I'm looking specifically at their Prism Silver PSA 10s for all of them across all the years, okay? And it's not everybody on that list, but I wanted to sort of show if you wanted to pick pricing some of these guys out, where to take opportunities. I had those categories: superstar candidates, emerging star, the hype-fulfilled guys, and the underdog stories. I will tell you, a lot of the ones who showed the most increases in price last year were those emerging stars and the underdog story type guys, because they didn't have as much expectation, and then they broke out in some capacity that was notable. You've got Zion at the top, $1,500 for his PSA 10 Prism Silver, Pop $1,524, $25 below that. You've got LaMelo, but Pop $195. We know there were quality control issues with that. So obviously that number could grow over time. We'll see what LaMelo does this season. And then moving down, Anthony Edwards. I think last year in general, most people thought Edwards sort of passed LaMelo in terms of like what people thought who was better. But again, there's a pop count issue here with Pop 914 on the Ant-Man versus 195 on the LaMelo. Jalen Green and Cade still seeing their PSA 10 Prism Silvers come through the pipeline with PSA. Very, very low population on those next on the list. And then you've got Maxey, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Donovan Mitchell. He's a guy I talked about, and I did put him on this list because he's got a new change of scenery. So who did we see last year like that? We saw DeMar DeRozan, who had a new change of scenery, who got into a much better situation, and then, he was the guy. Now, I actually think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Mitchell this year, because the Cavs are actually pretty deep. They're actually pretty deep. I don't know if Mitchell will really show up and shine as the leader of the team. He might, but again, you've got Mobley, you've got Garland, you've got Allen, you've got all these guys on the team. It'll be really interesting to see what Spider Mitchell's role is with them. Halliburton, he's on the Pacers. We'll see what happens with him. MPJ, we talked about him. He's a guy who, if you look at the rest of this list, with his scoring potential that people really believe he has, it does seem like there's room for him to grow, but that pop number is pretty high, 2135. That just goes to show you how much people thought of him a couple of years ago, and he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. So a lot of risk, maybe ultimate upside, downside on MPJ. Patrick Williams, Anthony, Colin Sexton's another guy we talked about, obviously. And scrolling down, and then we get to the bottom of this list of the cheapest guys. At $46, I'm probably not making a move on Javon Carter. And honestly, that sale was from like April of this year. He obviously has only 63 graded, and there's none of them selling on eBay or any of the other sites that we track. And then down here at the bottom, I've got PJ Washington Jr. and Dante DiVincenzo. Washington at $30, DiVincenzo at $44. If you think they might break out and you think they've got an opportunity to get up to that $60, $70 range, maybe worth scooping a few of them, pretty low risk. I don't know how much lower they would go. You might have a lower floor and a higher ceiling, and that's one of the things that I like to look for. So there's something here for everybody is the point. If this is your game, if you like to speculate in season and try to figure out who's gonna be good, here's the guys that I would potentially be looking at. But again, let me know. Who did I forget? Let me know down in the comments what stands out to you the most. So I laid it out: superstars, emerging stars, hype-fulfilled, underdog stories. There's a lot of different categories that you can be targeting, again, that focus in different price points too. So let me know what you think. And if you're interested, once again, in market movers, to do research like this, visit marketmoversapp.com and use promo code DIVE for your first 7 days. That's D-I-V-E, DIVE. If you liked this video, I'd love it if you would give me a thumbs up, subscribe, hit that little bell icon, and as always, until next time, happy investing.